accept that. All right, got it. All right, hi everybody. I'm Lori Dittmer. I am a master gardener and a master naturalist. I'm also an apiarist. So I have my little bee yard, my apiary right behind my house. And it's a new thing I started about 5 years ago, kind of more with a concern about the bees and what was going on. I wanted to do something to help them out, and I absolutely fell in love with the whole concept of what bees give to our community. So we're going to get started. We're going to start a little bit with kind of working our way down to honeybees in particular, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I just want everybody to kind of be all on the same page. So this is our scientific part, and this is about where it kind of divides out when you look at the good old KP Kafkas. And when you get down to order, honeybees and bumblebees and ants and wasps and hornets are all part of the same order. Because you can see they go through a metamorphosis. They have sucking mouth parts. They have slender waists. They have clear wings when present, 4 clear wings. There are some social species, and they have stingers present in many species. So the cool thing is then you go down, and if you actually look, I gotta move you guys are all in a great place on my screen. So there's the bees actually had their own special, what they call a clade within the order, and that's a super family. And then it goes down into seven families, which the bees are. So particularly bees, and bees are found on all continents, not in Antarctica, because it's too cold and there's not a lot of flowering plants there. And they live in every biome, from a desert to the rainforest to Arctic, not Antarctica, obviously, but the Arctic region where there are some flowers. So they're pretty diverse and they're pretty widespread. So if you look here, this is just kind of a little graphic that makes everybody kind of can agree with, and you get a little chuckle over that. You know, honeybees do lots of good things, and those wasps, they're angry. They go after our dinner. Those yellow legs are a big clue to being a wasp, and they definitely are much more aggressive about stinging than your honeybees or any of your solitary bees. But the reality is that even the wasps have a good part in our life. So if you look at this little graphic, I love this graphic. He has 2 of them right next to each other. Those yellow legs, the narrow waist, how they build their nests. So wasps, which do include hornets, will use a wood to build a nest. The paper, like the paper nest you see, are mud. So the mud bees that are in your front yard, and you go mowing and they get really angry with you. But they have some benefits. If you look in the lower right corner, they actually will lay their eggs on different insects and kill them, because their eggs will hatch and literally eat thing. The most famous one is the great horned tomato hornworm. Sorry, my apologies. Tomato hornworm and the parasitic wasp, and kill them right off. I'll show you a great picture of that in a second. And then your honeybees, they do produce wax, and they build honeycomb. They don't all make honey like we think of honey, but they do provide their own food. The solitary bees do not. They eat as they go along, and they have a hairy body. Of course, they both do have stingers, but they're both wonderful pollinators. So here you go. I apologize for the blurriness. This is actually a tomato hornworm in my garden. You can see some of the ones are hollow. That's where they've already hatched, and some of them have a white circle in them, or a white circle kind of coming out, and that is actually the offspring. And they do kill the great hornworm. So when you go in your garden and you see these wasps, leave them. Let them kill these guys off. This one was fascinating for us to watch. We went out each day and watched. And this tomato guy here, he didn't eat any tomatoes in my yard because he was dead before they even got to be ripened. So native bees, we're in New England, and as you can see, these are just some of the ones in the New England area. Lots and lots of native bees. Some of them are in small colonies. Some of them are completely solitary. Some of them kind of go through a process where they're in a small colony and then they go off, and once they hatch, they're solitary. So here you go. Here's the difference. So solitary bees, all the solitary bees are native to North America. They gather pollen from their head to their toe. So when you look at these bees out in the wild, you're going to see pollen everywhere, all over them. And all the females are queens because they're solitary, so they don't have workers working with them. The other thing that I really like about that people don't realize is when you get bit by a solitary bee or stung, the odds of it causing any kind of anaphylactic shock are very minimal. Their venom is very, very mild because they're not protecting a hive. They're also super pollinators. They really do a great job. We always talk about the honeybees, and I do love my honeybees, but these super pollinators are pretty prolific. So the honeybee is not native to the United States. It came from Europe. It is all over our country now. They live everywhere across the continental United States. They use what we actually call them pollen bags on the backs of their legs. They stick pollen to their legs. They do live about the same lifespan, but they work in a community, and we're going to talk about that a lot here in a little bit. They really work together, and they all have specific roles that are fascinating. Their venom is a little stronger because, again, they're protecting a hive. So their venom can be as strong as a wasp. We call yellow jackets, hornets, but they are different. So sometimes people will be allergic to a wasp sting or a hornet sting, but not allergic to a honeybee sting, and vice versa. They are aggressive. Their hives threatened. My husband can tell you that sometimes when my honeybees are a little cranky, if I go in there when the weather's not nice, they're a little bit more assertive than other times. And only 7 species are actually honeybees. There are different kinds of honeybees. We have Apis apis, the European honeybee here. There's the Africanized honeybees that you've heard about that are very assertive. The reason they were originally brought here to Central America was because they are great honey producers. So they tried to mix them with their local bees to produce more honey, but fortunately the assertiveness is what came through. So here you go. Here's a solitary bee. This is a minor bee. You can see all the iridescent on there. That's actually the bee, not the pollen. But you can see all the pollen everywhere. Head, antennas, body, and you don't see any pollen sacs or honey sacs in the back of their legs. And they just kind of gather and eat what they have. They don't need to take it any place. It's just for themselves to eat. And here's another one. These are all taken in my yard. So you can see we got quite the diversity. Here's a bumblebee. This was actually on one of my lemon trees, which I bring inside in the winter. So I know I don't grow them outside. But it was kind of funny last year. We were having some chilly nights, and we were bringing it inside and taking it back outside. And we would bring it inside, and all of a sudden we'd have a bumblebee flying around the sunroom because they had been hiding in there to keep warm for the night. And then they came inside the warmth of the room and the lights and wanted to try and get back to wherever they wanted to go. Anyways, so that's another solitary one. Again. All right, so how do we support that solitary bee population? There's a lot of ways. Of course, we talk about it with so many things, and as being naturalists, about leaving that biodiverse landscape there, food for the pollinators, do things that mimic nature, leave those snags, leave the brush piles, leave some bare soil to help encourage the ground nesting bees. Don't forget to water, plant lots and lots of different kinds of flowers. Think about your seasons, what blooms at what times. Bees really love those blue and white flowers. And of course, the sunflower family, which are mostly yellow, but they do love the blue and whites and the tubulars. And think about it. Talk to your urban planners. Talk to them about protecting those natural areas from the road runoff with all that salt that's going to kill it off and be unfriendly. Having roadside plantings and open areas for your solitary bees to go. The picture on the right is something that you probably have all seen. It's these little solitary bee houses that you can buy. They do work. I've had different kinds of bees in mine. But really any kind of reed. So at the end of the season, don't knock down and clear out your gardens. Those hollow tubes, they'll plant in there. Some of them will put their eggs for the winter to become the new queens next year, in underneath sticks, inside plant tubes. So, you know, there's just so many different opportunities for them to be protected in our communities. All right, so now the fun part, into the hive. So this is my apiary about, what, 2 years ago. So I had actually caught a swarm. And so that's what I'm actually doing. I'm pulling out a swarm and putting it into another hive. Bees can travel up to about 5 miles, and they really like to be about 1 hive per acre. But as we all know, we put several of them in, and we try and face them different directions so they kind of have their own space, and that helps them have more hives closer together. So here's my bees hanging out on the outside of my frame. If you look, you can actually see, let's see if I can put an arrow. Can you guys see the arrow? I put the arrow up. So this guy right here, he's actually a drone right there. And this guy's a drone. You can tell by the really big bulging eyes. So here you go. Here's your 3 dimensions. It gives you kind of a perspective on the different sizes. And when you go in the hive, you can really notice that it takes a little while to really pick them out. But once you do, they just pop out at you who they are. So the queen, gotta love that queen. So, you know, what happened is that queen, she tried to wear her crown, and that little tiny body, that crown kept slipping off. So Mother Nature kind of did some things for her to help her evolve and look like she has kind of a crown on and be identified. So first, when she's growing, this is what you see. This is all these little queen cells. So these are all queen cells here. And when one of these queens is born, she emerges, and one of her first tasks is to go chew out each one of these other queen cells and kill off her competition, because she wants to be, what they want is they want the strongest queen, so they let them kind of have at it and try and kill them off. Sometimes 2 will emerge at the same time, and they actually battle it out. They roll each other. They try and push each other out of the hive. This is a healthy hive because there are a lot of queens, and as you can see, all these queen cells are hanging down. This is a hive that planned to supersede the current queen. That queen's either going to fly away. The old queen's either going to take part of the hive and fly away to start a new colony, or she knew that she was getting old and it was time for her to pass on her genetics to a new queen. So here you can see this again. These are coming down. You know, they kind of remind me a little bit of morel mushrooms, but this is again another really healthy hive. These are not healthy hives as far as something has happened. Either the queen was killed or got sick, or something happened, she wasn't laying, and the hive decided that they needed a new queen. So what they did was they took some brood that had already been laid and decided to create this comb hanging from where they'd already laid some eggs and start feeding it royal jelly so that they could get a new queen. And this one right here, if you look, see that crack there? That means that she is just getting ready to come on out. And here is a queen emerging. These right here, these 2 bees are actually part of her retinue. They're there to protect her and get her all cleaned up. And if she decides that she's going to go kill the other queens, they're going to be there to help her out just in case another queen emerges and wants to fight. So the first one out usually gets the most attention and the most support from the hive. Occasionally a second or third queen that emerges does survive and becomes the queen. And occasionally all the queens get killed off. They fight each other and they both die from injuries. And then the hive is in trouble. Either they have to do what I showed you earlier with a comb, try and take another egg and get it started, or they actually become queenless and they either pass on, the hive dies, or they join another hive. So here you go. Here is your new queen. And you look right here, here's her pretty little crown. So, you know, those little tiaras don't sit real well on there. They keep falling off of them. So they have to have something permanent. So there's their crown. As you noticed earlier in our picture and in this picture, they're very, very long, and they have short wings. So that they don't, queen bees only fly a couple times in their lives. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of them is when they go out to mate, a virgin queen goes out to mate. And the other time is when the hive becomes overcrowded and they decide to split hive, and the queen she'll actually thin down, become a little bit slimmer and a little bit shorter. She'll stop laying eggs and she will take her hive to start another hive. Take about half of the workers and half of the drones with her. So there you go. There's your queen. In hives that are run by an apiarist, we often mark our queen because they can be sometimes difficult to see. You can see how these bees are all surrounding her. That's a real big clue to us. Her retinue kind of surrounds her and feeds her and cleans her, takes away her waste. She's also has some nurse bees around her because as she lays an egg, those nurse bees will take care of the eggs, the babies. But we do mark her. There's a couple of different reasons. One, it's easier to find her. And the other reason is the color. We use a different color each year. There's a rotating schedule. And so if we know the color, you know, sometimes if you have a couple of different hives, you forget which one had a queen when. This helps you go, oh, that queen's 2 or 3 years and we might want to replace her. We might want to keep an eye on her and make sure she's laying well because she's a little bit older. So that's what that coloring is right there. So now that you know all about queens, look at this picture. Can you find the queen? Remember, she's a little bit bigger. She has her little crown. And her wings are shorter. She often has bees around her that are taking care of her. So see if you can spot her. You don't have to send me any messages. Just kind of look at it and we're going to go on to the next page and we'll have the answer for you. Oh, Adrian put a message in. Oh,
Bottom right center.
Yep. And I also got a question about marking the queen. We actually just use, it's a liquid paint ink pen, you know, just like one you would buy at the store. You have to be very careful. You don't want to mark her eyes. You do just that little crown area. You don't want to blind her. But yeah, it's just regular paint pen. So, all right, everybody looked for a while, and did you find her? Did you find her without any help? There you go. So now that you see her, let's go back and look. And now that you know where she is, you can see the difference. There you go. So if you want to practice queen spotting, there's actually a girl called the Girl Next Door Honey, and she is on Facebook and she does these queen spotting things pretty regularly. So I'm just going to show you a little bit in the screen here. You can see, so some of these bees are inside. They're in there either cleaning it out or adding honey. You can look at over here, these ones up here in the upper right corner where my arrow is. Those are actually drones. See how those are bubbled up much higher than some of the other ones that are capped off, that are flatter? Those are workers. So you know you're going to get some drone bees here and you're going to get workers. And typically a hive has very few drones and a lot of workers. If you have all drones, it means that your queen has not been properly mated and she can't produce workers. So you're only going to get drones. So here you go. So here's just a little bit of the process of the queen laying the egg and the larva. And so what happens is, if you look at right in this stage, right in here, is when the nurse bees actually they cap off. See how this is hollow here? and this is capped. They've capped it with wax. Because they're no longer feeding it. They're no longer doing anything with it. They're just letting it go through metamorphosis. And then the new bee will chew its way out and emerge. And its very first job when it emerges is to be a nurse bee. So here you go. Here's this. I love this. I don't know how this picture came out as well as it did, but I got very lucky. So here's your eggs in the cell. Here's a picture of, here's your larva. You can see these are the nurse bees, all these right here. These are nurse bees going in there, feeding them, you know, maybe cleaning them up. We have a disease going on right now. I'm not going to get into any of the diseases really today, but there is a disease called varroa mite, and they'll try and lay, the varroa mites will try and lay their eggs in here. So these bees could be trying to clean those out of there, but it is, they take really good care of them. Oops, I got a question. All right, so I have another question about the painting of the queen. So I actually have a little device. It's looks kind of like a florist pick, and or a hair clip, and I just catch her and I kind of take her out of the hive, and then I put her on a little board that has a little covering on it with just a little hole in it, and I mark her in there. Because yes, the drones would get upset and the workers would get upset. They don't like their queen being taken away, but we do smoke. And one of the reasons we smoke is because it confuses their signals. They do a lot of communication with odors, with pheromones. And by putting the smoke in there, it breaks that pheromone message. And so the queen doesn't send out a distress signal that they can sense. So it does help us. So here's a new baby just emerging. I did not take this picture. I got this from a friend when we were at a training. She took it of a bee we saw emerging, because I didn't have my camera with me. But just fascinating to watch them chew their way out and be ready to be new. So what happens next is, all right, so you're born, right? So we humans, we hang out. Our moms take care of us. We we play with our Legos and our Duplos, and we go to school. And eventually we grow up and get jobs. Not worker bees. The minute they're born, their very first job is to turn around and clean out the cell that they were just in. So the first thing they do is clean out their cell, clean out the waste, and then they go on to being what we call nurse bees. And they take care of all the brood. And they can have different jobs as nurse bees. They could be either feeding, they could be tending, they could be cleaning out the waste, they could be capping, but basically they stay in the brood cells. And if you go into a man-made hive, a Longstrom hive, we have frames, which I showed you a picture of the frame earlier. The queen will pretty much keep all the brood in one area. So if you go in that area, you're going to find lots of nurse bees. Your workers that are doing honey gathering or honey making are going to be in different parts of the hive. So these nurse bees hang out there after they're born and take care of their younger siblings and step siblings. So another job they do is bees actually make their own wax. And these right here, these are little sheets of wax on the back side of the bee. This area of the bee right now does not have a stinger. It does not have its second stomach for making honey. It's making these waxings, and they will produce these, and they'll put them in their mouth, and they'll chew them up, and they'll push them out so that they can, if you look over here in this area, start making these beautiful combs, or even pass them on to the nurse bees for cappings. And these are really your architect work bees. And I love it because this picture right here with these bees all holding hands, spreading from one area to another. I've seen this so many times in my hives, and every time it just fascinates me how they can all hang on and make this amazing chain to get from one place to another. But again, these are your architects. So they're making the wax, they're building the comb, they're getting things from one place to another. So here you are again. Here's your architect bees. This is what we call Landstrom hive. You are seeing it looking down on it from on top. So those bees that you see there, probably 90% of them are the architect bees, are the ones making the wax, building the comb. I don't see any capped brood in that area right there. So they're definitely not nurse bees, because nurse bees would be where the babies are being laid. But they are busy, and they're doing their jobs. Some of them will take actually what we call propolis, which is like a glue, and they'll stick it in these spaces here, because they don't like any space that things can get in, and they'll glue this stuff down. So when I open the hive up, I have to kind of crack this glue stuff. You have any questions?
Nope.
All right. All right. So here's our honey makers. So this is basically your sous chefs. Let's call them your sous chefs. So what happens is the bees that go out and gather, they bring back the nectar in their stomach, and they actually add enzymes to it. And then you people have heard, yes, honey is basically bee vomit in a sense. So they bring it back and they pass it on to the honeybees that are working in the food factory at the front entrance. And then these bees will go up to where the honey is being made, and they'll put it in there. And they have two jobs. One is to transport it from the gathering bees, the bees that are out in flight, collecting everything. And then there's other bees that will sit there and they'll fan it, because honey is very liquidy when it first comes back. It's, basically nectar and a little bit of those stomach enzymes, and they fan it to try and dry it. And once it gets to a certain level of dryness, it will actually be capped, just like the brood is capped, with wax. But they can't cap it until it gets to a certain percentage of moisture. Otherwise, it will go bad. So actually, if we get towards the end of the season and we have to go in and pull honey frames off, if the frames aren't capped, we will use that honey to make mead. Or we'll take some capped stuff and add water to it so that it will ferment and turn into mead. So here's your retinue. So they've definitely been nurse bees. They might have been honey makers or not honey makers. They might have been architects, or they might have gone right into it. There's no necessary order other than they all start out as nurse bees and end up as gatherers. But the retinue does everything for the queen. They clean the queen, they protect the queen, they pick up her waste, they feed her, whatever she needs, they do. And they often, this picture is very typical of your queen being surrounded by her retinue and taken care of. So that's one thing when you go into the hive, you definitely look to see if you can find the circle around her, and that's how you find your queen. So anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. I did a little over an hour in my practice presentation. I know it has to be 45 minutes, so I'm trying to hustle through. So here are some of your retinue that have actually gone off and gotten the food for the queen. And those little things you see hanging out, these right here, these are proboscis. They actually suck up that honey and take it back to the queen. And this picture, I took it, and when I blew it up, it was clearer than I thought, and I just really like it. So I wanted to share it with you. But this is and they will eat it themselves as well. So you'll have lots of bees in there eating and trying to get the honey. During the summer, they tend to eat a lot of bee bread and pollen. In the winter, the stores that they've made, they break open. So one of the things we have to watch out for in the winter is that they still have honey in their hive, or we have to add some. So I have honey stashed that I will put in, or I will make what we call a candy board, which looks kind of like fondant made with the honey for the bees to eat during the winter, because they will starve to death. They stay in a really tight ball to stay warm, and they move very slowly. So they have to have the food very close to them. Do we have a question?
It was just about clarifying about a worker bee and then how it becomes a nurse bee or a cleaner.
Okay. We will get into the little bit about the nurse bee, a worker bee versus a queen bee. The only difference when they're in their cell is, as I showed you earlier, the queen cell is bigger, and they feed the queen bee something called royal jelly, and they make the royal jelly, and it's there, and that's what the queen primarily lives on. She does get some honey, but she primarily lives on what we call royal jelly to keep her a queen. And a worker bee gets just regular honey and pollen and bee bread. So when a queen accidentally dies or something happens to the queen, and they make those new cells to try and get the queen cell off an egg that's already been laid, the first thing they do is start feeding them royal jelly. So if you have, for some reason, if the hive hasn't figured out that the queen is sick, and all the brood is capped because it's, she hasn't laid in a while, then they can't produce a new queen. They need to be starting that special one that I told you kind of looks like a morel mushroom before the egg is turned into it. Oh, what is bee bread? So bee bread is a mix of pollen and enzymes from the bees, and it looks like it actually kind of looks like a little tiny bread patty. It fits inside one of those little tiny cells, and it just has a very bready look to it. Crumbly bread, more like, to me it looks more like a muffin than bread because it's more crumbly like a muffin, but it's made from the pollen that they gather. Thanks for asking that question. All right, so then you go on to being your guard bees, and these are your guard bees, and this is actually my hive. So if you look over here, this right here, this is what I put on my hive to keep the mice out, and it also kind of controls, it helps them kind of protect the hive a little bit better because a big swarm can't come in of yellow jackets and steal their honey or try and kill them off. It just kind of controls them a little bit. But this is, so probably these guys are either getting ready to fan, or maybe they just came back from a flight and didn't have a lot of pollen, because I don't see a lot on their legs here. But they're keeping an eye out on the hive here. They're really making sure that the bees that come back are from their hive. Like I mentioned before, they try and keep their hives apart, but when you're an apiarist and you have an apiary, you have more than one hive, so they have to kind of make sure that it's a bee from their hive, and it's based on pheromones. Make sure it's not a yellow jacket. One thing, raccoons will come in and they'll actually scratch at the hive to make the guard bees come out and check out what's going on, and then they'll eat them. I don't know if they must have really tough tongues that don't mind the stingers, but so these guard bees are kind of looking for that. One time when I was very new to this, I did not realize the importance of not going into the hive in the evening or at night. And we had put a separator on to get to some honey, and I was gone all day, and I came back just as the sun was setting, and I wanted to get it off because it's not good for the bees to have that on there. And those guard bees were guarding. They were ticked off. They didn't know if I was a bee knocking them over or something attacking them, but they were very, very unhappy. And it's probably the most stung I've ever been as a beekeeper. So this bee over here, this is your typical fanning. They're pushed up on their legs. See how their legs are pushed up? Their back end is up in the air, and they are fanning. You can't even see their wings. They're fanning so fast, and they are fanning out warning pheromones to let you know that there is something here that they don't want to be near the hive. So when I go and I smoke, I look for this, and I try and avoid this. I want my bees to be as unstressed as possible. So if they're doing this, that tells me that I haven't smoked them enough, and I've moved things too quickly or made too much noise. Maybe they sense my discomfort. If I'm really hot in the summer and I'm in my suit, I'm kind of grumpy myself because I don't want to be that hot, and maybe they can sense that. But this is a sign that they are on alert, and they know that something's out there that they don't want near their hive. So then they finally get to go out and gather, and they're gathering water. They go to ponds. They go to, I love this picture. A leaf, get a drop of water off a leaf and suck it up. Again, you can see the proboscis here sticking out to bring that water up. One of the things we have to be careful is, you know, we have neighbors who have swimming pools. So we need to make sure that we have a decent body of water. We put a pond in so the bees can go to that instead of going to my neighbor's pool and frightening the children or to our pool. But yeah, so they do. And it's kind of neat. We sit by the pond and the bees, there's a flight line. It's just like standing outside JFK, watching the planes come in, the bees coming in, going to their favorite rock, getting some water and flying back to the hive, particularly in the summer when it's very hot. So here you can see how they do it. This is how they gather it. They've got these beautiful pollen sacs here. And the pollen does stick to their fine hairs. They go into the tree or into the flower. I mean, sorry, the tree. It's a fruit tree in this picture. They gather the pollen. They use their proboscis, which you can see. This isn't always sticking out. Right now it's sticking out because it's going to go in that tree, that fruit tree, and it's going to try and grab some nectar. And maybe it will drop off some pollen and pick up some pollen. And again, that's how they are used for pollinating our plants and helping our plants transfer pollen from one plant to another. Question?
They're talking about if chlorinated water would be harmful to bees.
You know, I would think it would be just like most animals, but the bees seem to drink it and be okay with it. I don't know if they process it differently. I will say that when my pool is highly chlorinated, which is pretty rare because our dog swims in our pool, we keep it pretty low. They tend to be around less, so maybe they can smell it and don't come near it. But people who have this, you know, real common now are those UV filtration and the salt filtration. And so, yeah, that doesn't seem to bother them at all. They go right for it. But yeah. Oops, sorry. So here's some of the bees in my yard. You can see those pretty pollen sacs right here. Got the proboscis going in there, trying to get some nectar, just covered with pollen. There's that big old pollen sac right there. Again, this one is not one of my pictures. This is by Alex Wild. He's a professional photographer, but I just wanted to share that with you because it's just amazing to see all those little pollen granules on there. You can see how all these kind of work like you would use like flour to make the bee bread. So a question I have is, can you see a pollen sac with a naked eye? Absolutely. I mean, I just showed you those pictures. You can totally see that. It is completely there. They use spit to kind of mix up the pollen. They can carry quite a bit. I've never seen a weight number, but yes, it does slow them down. They do, you know, they are kind of come back. I've watched them come back completely full, kind of, you know, all I can think of is like a big jumbo jet, you know, wide body jumbo jet kind of coming in. And when they leave the hive, they're like a fighter jet taking off. So it does slow them down. They will sometimes be out there collecting pollen and it'll be a storm and they're just not strong enough to get back. So they hide in a flower or somewhere to wait out the storm. And they've also had them knocked off. There are some people who collect the pollen and they actually put little electric charges on their landing board of their hive, and that electric charge knocks that pollen off onto their board. So the bees don't get to enjoy it, but the producer then can collect pollen and sell it. I do not do that. I let them have all the pollen they want. I just take their excess honey. So here's just some more pictures of bees in my yard out there gathering. So you're kind of, one of the things that's really neat about bees is their sense of communication. It's dark in the hive, let's be honest. There's not a lot of light in there. You know, they don't put up little Christmas lights or don't have LEDs in there to see. So they use a lot of pheromones, like I mentioned, a lot of smell and large movements. So when a gathering bee finds a food source, he goes back to the hive and then he starts telling them what we call a waggle dance, where that food is. And it's based on the sun. So one of the things with a beehive is they orient themselves. When a new bee goes out on its first foraging flight, it actually orients itself, tries to find the sun and knows, So if I ever choose to move my hive, I have to close my hive up and I have to move it either less than 5 feet or more than a mile. Otherwise, they won't go out and reorient and they'll get confused and they'll get lost and we'll lose several of our foragers because they do orient themselves to the sun and they know where their hive is in relation to the sun. So anyway, so they waggle the source of the sun and then they do a time. These are, I mean, different people will tell you different things, but for every 100 meters, the bees wiggle an additional 75 or 75 milliseconds. And then again, the richer the source, the more they'll dance. They'll go around and around and around. And then the other foragers will go out with them and bring it back. And I have seen where I have put a flowering plant or, a budding plant out on my porch. And all of a sudden there's a honeybee. And then the next thing I know, again, another flight line of these bees coming, especially when I put out my citrus trees and they start to bloom. The process is pretty interesting to watch. So I've seen it in real life. It's really impressive. So again, here you go. Here's just a little description of the dance. It's called the Waggle Dance because they waggle their back ends. So someone was asking about how much the bees travel. So there you go. To get 16 ounces of honey requires over 1,000 bees to travel over 100,000 miles and visit 4.5 million flowers. So that's pretty significant. I mean, when you think about when you think about from beekeepers' point of view, our bees go out and do all the hard work. They really do the hard work, but then we have to get it out of the hive, filter it. I do not process my honey. My honey is what we call raw, but I do put it through a mesh bag just to get the little bee parts out or any little dead bugs or whatever might be in there out of it. What?
Wax.
Yeah, some wax. I get a lot of wax in mine. And then I bottle it. So yeah, it's intensive. Those bees worked really hard for it, which is why I personally leave enough honey on them. I try every year for them to get through the winter without having to give them sugar supplements or, feed them corn syrup. I try and have them, use their own food that they have gone out and worked hard to gather. The honey has different tastes. If I take a frame off in the spring, they've mostly been in pine trees in my neighborhood, in my hives. So it has kind of a piney taste. When I have tons and tons of mint leaves and it gets a minty taste. It's just kind of neat, the different thing. And then the winter or the fall, they are on the goldenrod and the buckwheat, and it's darker and it has a stronger flavor to it. A deeper flavor, kind of like I call it my Guinness of honey, those fall honeys. So yeah, so they work hard and they go to lots of different flowers and plants. So there's a lot of stuff I've already told you. The nectar affects the honey and the color and flavor. If you go into a store, even if you're getting legitimate honey, it will often say wildflower, and that's because they're going to so many different flowers. Unless you have, put the hive in the middle of a buckwheat farm or a goldenrod field, they're going to get different flowers that are blooming into their honey as far as the pollen and nectar. So, yep. Any questions?
Nope. It's 45.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you, that was one of the little things about the Little Prince. So here's the Little Prince. These drones, man, oh man, these drones, their life starts off really good. They're born, they're the prized possession of the queen. She wants those drones because they're passing on her DNA. They are the golden boys, and they do nothing in the hive. They don't clean, they don't gather, they just hang around. They're so lazy that someone else cleans up their poop, those worker bees, all their stepsisters, and feeds them. And then when they're older, they get to go out and hang out in the single bars. They literally go every day to what we call a drone congregating area, which is like the drone single bar, and that's where they hang out. But those little princes eventually, just like the royal princes that got put in the tower and disappeared, eventually get kicked out. Come winter, no new virgin queens are being born, and all their stepsisters are sick and tired of taking care of them, and they don't want to waste food on them. So as it gets cold, you all of a sudden you realize fall's here, because you look outside the hive and there's all these dead drones on the ground, because they literally drag them out and toss them outside and won't let them back in. So those poor little princes who had that good life when they were younger, if they haven't mated and winter comes, their life is done. They are thrown out and frozen to death.
Want to talk about the life of the one that does mate?
Yes, we are going to talk about the one that does mate. But then there's those drones. Oops, I'm going to go back a second. I don't want you to read that whole thing. So the drones go to that bar, and their goal is to mate with a virgin queen. If you remember, I showed you those pictures in the beginning of the virgin queen hatching. What she does is she flies out and she mates. And she's a hussy because she mates with lots of drones. And she actually carries their semen inside of her for her entire life. And every baby she I can't say births, every little egg she lays could be same sisters, different brothers. So all sorts of step siblings. So there's a lot of step sibling rivalry in there, but a single mom taking care of all of them. That queen, she loves all her children the same, even they all have different baby daddies. But these drones are pretty excited. When they see a queen come into that singles bar, they chase her and they chase her and they chase her, and they want to be the one to mate with her. So they chase her. Their day is right there. They're thrilled to death. And she flies as fast as she can, and they chase her. And when a drone finally catches her, he mounts her in midair. And instead of having a stinger, this is why drones can't sting. Instead of having a stinger, they have a penis-like, we call it an endophallus, that is full of sperm. And he puts that inside of her, and she clamps down on that thing so hard that it literally breaks off on side of her, and he falls to his death, dragging his entrails. So poor drone male, he dies one of two ways. He either dies happy or he dies frozen. So they get to choose. I guess they don't get to choose. The queen gets to choose, but that is their life. They do not make it past one season. So here you can see some pictures. This is a graphic over here. You can see where it's broken off here, and he's falling to his death. And then here's an actual picture of mating midair. And here is your happy queen coming back. She's a brand new, she left as a virgin and she came back having had a real fun couple of days mating, and she's being welcomed back to the hive, and she's going to start laying eggs soon. You can see right here, here's a gather coming back with pollen sacs. Maybe this is her retinue coming to be ready for her, because she looks like this one's kind of cleaning her off. This one's cleaning her off. These two are cleaning her off. These are probably a couple guard bees here. But yeah, so those poor drones. Good life in the beginning, rough life. So someone asked how long bees live. It depends. The average bee lives 4 to 6 weeks. And the reason for that is because once they start gathering, they're out in the bad weather. Their wings are getting tattered from, being knocked around and working. In the fall, the last set of bees that the queen lays, they're not out gathering, they're balling up, and they live much longer. They live from about October until late spring when they go out gathering again. A queen will live for 2 to 5 years, depending on its health and its environment, and how well it was mated. And the drones, as you well know, they get laid in the spring and they die in the fall unless they've mated. All right, so this is just a list of all those things that are brought to you by bees, both solitary and by honeybees. Quite the list, as you can see. I'm sure you can find your favorite food on there somewhere. And here's some things you can do. We kind of talked about these before with the solitary bees. Keep those pesticides to a minimum. Dandelions, first thing that blooms in the spring, is a lifesaver for honeybees. So I let my dandelions go. And then buy local raw honey. All that honey you see in the store and those little bears, most of it comes from China, and they are not they're made often with corn syrup or superheated, and they've lost their value. Local honey gives you local pollen, so it's great for allergies. And then I'm going to end with this before asking questions, because I just love this. Where flowers bloom, so does hope. I say where there are flowers, there's hope for bees, and where there are hope for bees, there's hope for humanity. And that's from Lori Wendenhammer. I just think it's just a beautiful saying that as long as we have bees, we do have humanity. So I'm going to close out my screen and open it up to questions. So I see a few here on the side. So is there an evolutionary advantage or purpose to the drone's death? Yes. So the evolutionary advantage is that every year there are new drones. So they have the new health of maybe a new queen. She wants that to spread her DNA, because her obviously most of her daughters aren't going to keep her DNA. It's just going to be the one that makes queen. And they really, really don't want to keep feeding and taking care of them in the winter. They have no purpose in the winter. They're not going to live until spring to go out and mate, and they're just going to take up food and space in the hive. So that's why they get knocked out. Do you sell your honey? I do not sell my honey because I have so many friends who I want to give it to for free that they get it. And I try, in case I do lose a hive, because I have lost them, I try to put enough, like 1 year's worth away. Honey, they have found honey inside the Egyptian tombs that is still edible. It does last forever. There are so many stories about how it can help you medicinally. I won't get into that. I could talk about my bees and the honey and all that stuff like that for hours and hours. Where is the best place to put our hive? Ours is in a tree line and has shade and gets morning and midday light, but is protected from wind. So my bees are actually on a tree line, just like yours, but they face the southern sun. So if you put the front of the box towards the south, mine are kind of like southeast, south, and southwest a little bit. So the bees are coming into their hives from a little bit different angles, but it does protect them from the wind. I have some sunflowers that I grow along the northern side of it. So hopefully by the time winter comes, I can lay those big stalks up as a windbreak. But I get gangbusters honey because they're down in those pine trees in the spring first thing, and they are pulling pollen like crazy off of those. But they do get full morning sun, because that full morning sun is what gets them up and going. They wait for the sun. Does the color of the hive matter? No, it does not matter. In fact, it's really cool. There's been studies done, and we have a friend who has lots and lots of hives, and they paint every hive a different color and then put a little emblem above the entrance. And the bees seem to be able to acknowledge it. Oh, I live in the yellow hive, or I live in the purple hive with the green flower. So it's really cool. So yeah, it doesn't matter at all.
Bees seem not to be able to see red very well.
No,
so
they do
red
not.
doesn't help.
Right. Oh yeah. So my husband said we don't not. My husband drinks it in his coffee every day, and I do bake with it. There's a lot of talk about that you really shouldn't cook honey, that it can make it a little bit toxic. Not toxic like you're gonna get sick, but just not, it gets rid of the nutrients in it. So I often add it at the end, or if I'm cooking like a bread, I don't do like a high heat bread, I do a low heat bread. I've heard that mass-produced bee hotels can actually be harmful to bees, prone to fungus. Is this true? And if so, is it best to make your own? Actually, so the bee hotels, you're talking about the solitary bees? Who is that, Camille? Are you talking about the solitary bees?
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, some of them, especially like the ones, I hate to say it, made in China, they're using chemicals on them to preserve them, and they aren't good. So yeah, doing your own with we have kind of wild bamboo here you can use, Phragmites, which is like not good for anything. In the fall, if you cut down some and use those tubes, it'd be great for them. So yeah, so I would try and stay away from the ones that are not, that you don't know where they're made or what they're made of. And really, I mean, the hotel, they're nice, they're pretty looking, but really just putting a bunch of sticks and some tubing, some plant material in your backyard is going to help them. And the biggest thing is, what's so sad is those not only bees, but fireflies. I don't know if anybody knows this. Fireflies take 2 years from when they lay their eggs until you have fireflies. So if they lay in the debris in your backyard, the fallen leaves and the branches, and then you break them all up in the fall, you've just taken all their habitat and their eggs away. So, leave a section of your yard. If I know some neighborhoods with HOAs, or if we live in apartments, we can't do it. But if you can, just leave a place a little bit wild, and don't even touch it. Don't rake it up or anything. And it's great for them. All right, any more questions?
There's one, how do you avoid bears raiding your hive?
Oh, so that is a great question. And so the great thing about bears is that if you keep them out of your hive to begin with, they probably won't attack it. So we went and bought, I don't know if you remember that picture. I bought one of those 10 by 10 like dog run things from Tractor Supply and put it around my apiary. And I did that right off the bat so that if the bears aren't motivated, but once they've gotten into your hive, you can put an electric fence around it and it's not going to stop them. But just having a chain link fence around it right now works fine because they haven't gotten in, they haven't tasted the honey. And I also don't leave, like if I take frames out, I don't leave them out right by the hive. I make sure that they're somewhere else. So, any other questions? Anything I missed? Anybody want to ask questions verbally? Turn off your mic. No. Did I talk too fast?
No complaints on
great.
text.
Oh, thanks.
I have a kind of wasp question.
Okay.
So I discovered that I'm allergic to wasps, and when I got an allergy test for it, they said I'm not allergic to honeybees. I am allergic to paper wasps. I'm not allergic to yellow jackets, but I am allergic to yellow hornets.
Right.
And I don't know what a yellow hornet is, because when I tried to look it up, all I could find about it was for like allergy doctor venom.
Right. So you know what a hornet looks like, a bald-faced hornet.
Mhm.
There are some that actually, like, if you look at their ball down, there's like the white face ones. Those are the nasty ones. Those are the ones I like the least. Those swell me up like nobody's business, and they're just very aggressive. But the yellow hornets are literally yellow, so that their head is yellow.
And the famous murderer hornets that came to the Northwest were yellow also.
Right, but those look like giant yellow jackets. They're striped, and we don't have those here yet. Knock on wood. Let's keep them away from here. But yeah, it is interesting that the different venoms, people say I'm allergic to honeybees, and then you find out it's really just the yellow jackets. Thank you for the compliment on my photography. That's I enjoy taking pictures of my bees and all sorts of other stuff. And a sweet presentation. That's great. I love it. Somebody said, can I have your email? Sure. I'm going to type it right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I sent in a question and you haven't read it yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
What was your question?
I have about a quarter of an acre. I've had bees before in Texas, but moving here, I have a quarter acre that I let grow wild, lots of native plants, lots of bee-loving flowers. And every year I'm having less and less bees.
Are you surrounded by people who are using pesticides?
I'm wondering if that's the case.
Yep.
I'm trying to teach them not to.
Yep. I'm actually really excited. When I decided to get bees, I went around to all my neighbors and I gave them a little tiny brochure I made up about the difference between honeybees and yellow jackets and why I was using honeybees, and if they had any concerns or questions to let me know. And 3 of my neighbors stopped pesticiding and fertilizing their lawns because of my honeybees. So I was so excited that they cared enough about my bees to stop putting toxins in the yard.
That hates bees and will step on them, and I'm trying to train him not to do that, and he is being better about it, but no.
One thing you might consider is most areas there's a beekeepers club or association locally, and they won't put their hives on your land if you volunteer your land as a host area if you don't want to do it yourself.
Yes.
So that might be a way to encourage the bees to live there where you welcome them.
Right.
Yes. Well, I was very terrified actually after 4 years being here, less and less. And this last year I saw 2 bees.
Oh, yeah, I feel so blessed. We live in a neighborhood. We have neighbors on both sides of us, so it's a development with what we say 250 homes.
Yep.
I mean, it's an older neighborhood, about 30 years old. We've lived here for 7 years, but I get more and more bees every year. I'm just so excited. It seems like the more I leave my yard wild,
Mhm.
the more bees come. I have fireflies coming back. When we first moved here, there were 0 fireflies in our yard. And this last summer, we could sit out by the pool and just watch them lighten up the sky. So there's still hope for you. Just keep doing your best, and hopefully your neighbors will follow suit of not putting pesticides down.
I'll try that. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, I'm gonna sign off then. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. I enjoyed talking to all of you. I did put my email in the chat area if anybody wants to email me privately with questions. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, Lori.
Night.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Mhm.